You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos Stilianessis.
All right, everybody, welcome to episode 41 of Here for the Truth. As always, I'm Joel Rafidi, and this podcast is co-hosted by a friend here in LA.
Yerasimos, Stilianessis.
Yerasimos Stilianessis. As always, for any divination needs, please head to my website, joelrafidi.com. If you're after specific human design readings, or if you're in the LA area looking for some body work, please reach out to Yerasimos. Today, we have a very special woman indeed. Her name is Jennie Morton. And let me tell you a bit about Jennie. After a long career as a ballet dancer, musical theater performer, actor, and singer, Jennie recognized the need for specialist care for the arts population and became an osteopath specializing in the field of performing arts medicine. She spent 10 years as a clinician at the British Association for Performing Arts Medicine and co-created a master's degree in performing arts medicine at Universiversity College, London, training graduate medical and healthcare practitioners in the specifics of working with artists. As a keen observer of human behavior, she became fascinated with the interplay between emotions and health and furthered her training with a master's in psychology. Now based in Los Angeles, her practice has a strong focus on psycho-physiology and behavioral health, exploring the links between habitual thought patterns and the expression of physical symptoms. She is also passionate about empowering individuals to a deeper understanding of the self in order to create sustainable, dynamic, and regenerative health. Jennie holds certifications as a clinical anxiety treatment professional, a mental health integrative medicine provider, and is also a certified HeartMath practitioner. She's written many articles that have been published in medical journals and arts publications, and is the author of 3 books, including The Authentic Performer, Wearing a Mask, and The Effect on Health. Jennie is also a performance coach, helping artists with technique optimization and connecting with authenticity. As a vocal health specialist, she helps individuals connect to their authentic voice for optimal self-expression. A passion for unified physics, sacred geometry, and the physics of consciousness underlie all of Jennie's work. She believes we all have a collective responsibility for what we put into the field, so she helps individuals tend to their own soil to ensure whatever they contribute to the world will be of the highest nutritional content for all. Wow. Jennie, welcome to Here for the Truth.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so blessed we met, what was it, a month and a half ago through a mutual friend, and we live in the same area. And I've been blessed to work with you. It was just one time, but you had a major impact on me and some headaches that I was dealing with. And just happy to have you here and your wealth of knowledge. And I'm so excited. Like, it feels like Halloween today, even though I don't really celebrate it, where it's like, I don't know what treats we're going to get, with the dialogue, with that. Yeah, or tricks with the bio and everything. I'm just really, really excited. Do you have what? I want to start off here. I want to start off as a performer, as a musician, as that being, the early part of your life. What was it that got you then to go down all these different rabbit holes? Like, tell us a little bit about your journey and major rites of passage. Let's start there.
Okay. Yeah, I've been down a lot of rabbit holes, or black holes, if you're talking about physics. And they're not the dead end as we've been taught. So that's another story. But yeah, I grew up in the arts. I come from an arts family. My mom was a Royal Ballet trained dancer and had her own dance studio. And I was, apparently I did my first ballet class when I was 14 months old, because as soon as I was on my feet, I was joining in. And my dad was a TV director at the BBC. And so most weekends we were all up at the BBC as a family, and I was in TV studios for rehearsals of, big primetime shows that my dad was working on. And I just had a kind of deep curiosity about behavior right from an early age. I think, I came into this world kind of going, so what's this all about? I never quite felt like I fitted here. And I always have this sort of detached curiosity about what this is, what's going on. And obviously being around artists all the time, and you know, I was in TV studios with what was sort of very well-known personalities of the day, and I knew what the public perception was of those people, and people would say, oh wow, you know so and so, oh I love them, and I was thinking, you know, not quite the side of the person that I see on the other side of the camera. And so I got this idea that people are not always what they promote themselves to be, and that, you know, someone that was, you know, such a funny, amazing character on TV could actually be quite a horrible person, and, you know, yelling at everyone in the studio. And then there were other people who were, you know, obviously a quivering wreck before the show went on, and but yet were, you know, the epitome of confidence on screen. And I realized that all of them are terrified, whether they're bullying everyone, whether they're sort of arrogant and being narcissistic, or whether they're terrified. They were all terrified. So I just used to observe all this going on. And then I worked myself in the performing arts from a very early age. I did my first film acting job at 5. And then from the age of 7, I was at a full-time theatre arts school. And from the age of 8, I was touring. I got a child role in a ballet with one of England's largest ballet companies. And I spent 5 years doing London seasons and being on national and international tours. So I was with this sort of adult professional artists from a young age, and again seeing all the behavioral interplay. So I'd already become a student of human behavior right from then. And I think the arts is kind of like a magnification, if you like, of what a lot of people do in their regular life. They go to work and they play the role of a lawyer or an accountant or whatever, but actually they're like, oh, it's not really who I am. So that was kind of the behavioral aspect. And then as a performer, as a dancer, particularly, you get a lot of injuries. Bodies, you know, the body is your instrument, and so you are very dialed into the nuances of what's working, what's not working. And so I had this sort of inherent sense of that. But actually, when I was 17, I was at dance college, and, you know, a year out from heading off into the profession. And I had horrible shin splints, which, you know, if anyone's had them, pretty painful. And I literally couldn't dance. I could barely walk. And so I was sitting out of all my classes and not knowing what to do, and thinking this could be the end of my career right now, before it's even started. And one of those serendipitous moments, a poster went up on the notice board at college, and it said, a final year osteopathy student who is a former dancer is doing a thesis in shin splints in dancers and needs case studies. And I was like, me?
Wow.
So,
cosmic wink, one of those cosmic winks.
Totally. So I was like, yeah, sign me up. And so I would go 3 times a week to the British School of Osteopathy in London and work with this final year student. And she would have all the sort of junior students in observing her sessions as well, because when you're a final year student, you know, you get the sort of the students below you coming and observing. And literally in the first session, she picked apart all the stuff that I was doing in my dance technique that had led me to get this problem. I thought, I've been in full-time dance training for 10 years by that point, and not one teacher has ever picked this up. So I was like, I like this osteopathy thing. So it was already sort of lodged in the back of my brain. And because she was teaching these other students during my sessions, I was absorbing. I'm a big sponge, you know, I just love learning new information. So I was absorbing all this anatomical information, going, oh God, I get that. And I see what's happening here. And I was teaching, I started teaching dance from the age of 13 as well. So I was then bringing that into my teaching. And then every show I ever did as a professional, either in the ballet company or then when I moved into musical theatre, West End shows, I always used to become the unofficial company masseur. You know, I had a kind of a knack for you know, working out the issues in people's muscles, and people would be like, oh, would you do my neck and shoulders before the show and I'll give you a bottle of wine? You know, it's kind of like we trade because we're such healthy beings in the arts.
Yeah, of course.
So I had this kind of, knack for it. And then people would say to me, you should train in this, you should do this, you should, and I was kind of like, yeah, I am kind of interested. So I actually trained initially as what we call in England a sports massage therapist. So it's not your sort of holistic beauty type massage, it's specifically targeted towards specific injuries. So it's a slightly deeper training in anatomy and the understanding of injury causation. And I used my knowledge of dance technique, of instrumental musicians technique, of vocal technique to not only treat symptoms, but also look at what people were doing technically to lead to the problem, because there's so much in healthcare of treating the what and not addressing the why, right? So you have to address the why, otherwise the person's just going to go away and repeat the behavior and end up with the same problem again in 6 months' time. So you're not dealing with the problem, it's just a band-aid. So I'd started doing that, and I was still performing at that time. So I was treating people in the day and then doing my show at night. And then, with anything in healthcare, if you are a practitioner of any integrity, I would suggest, the more you know, the more, well, we say the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, but also the more you know in healthcare, the more terrified you are of what you don't know. I'm like, well, I know what muscles are and tissues and connective tissue and ligaments and tendons, but what are they made up of? Well, what's the cellular structure? And then what's the extracellular structure? And what's the atomical structure? And well, if I don't know what's under my hands, I have no right to put my hands there, right? So that's why I'm now into quantum level to looking at that, which is where mass actually starts to disappear and you start to go, what even is the body? But that's maybe a topic for later in the conversation. But so that drove me to go, I need to know more. I don't feel I know enough. And so there was that little, as you say, the cosmic wink from before about becoming an osteopath. And what drew me towards osteopathy, and so many dancers particularly would seek out osteopaths over physiotherapists, as we call them in England, or PTs, because they took a very global approach to treatment. They did look at the why, they look at you within your psychological as well as physical framework and the environment that you exist in, the physical and emotional environment in which you exist. So it's a more global approach. And so that very much resonated with me, but it's a 5-year degree. So I had to be at a place in my life where I could fit that in.
Hey, Jenny, real quick. Is there a difference between osteopathy in like Europe versus the US? Because like, what's a DO and I'm just curious if you can kind of just talk about that just briefly.
Yeah, there's a big difference. So strangely, osteopathy actually was born here in the US, but it's kind of been lost here. So in the rest of the world, which would be Australia as well, we are sort of an independent profession, much like PTs or chiropractors. We're not under the medical umbrella. We have our own governing bodies. We have, relatively medical training, but as osteopaths, our training is all hands-on. You learn your anatomy on the body. We learn manual treatment. So it's manual medicine. Yes, we're looking at disease states, immune system issues, but our philosophy is that if every organ and system in the body has a good blood flow in, good drainage out, and a good nerve supply, then it's a self-healing, self-diagnosing, self-maintaining system. So our job is to not fix anything. I don't like this idea that, I come to you, you fix my back. That's not what's taking place. I'm helping to create the conditions that facilitate blood flow in, drainage out, and a good nerve supply to let the body do its own thing. It's not for me to impose my will upon a body part or a body tissue. It is to facilitate the dynamic health state of those tissues so that they'll self-organize them. I'm kind of more of a midwife or doula, as we were talking about earlier, in the process. So in the US, when there was a big drive, in the sort of middle of the 20th century towards, you know, the medical model, and that anything that's a natural approach, because we don't prescribe medication, we don't, you know, do invasive procedures or anything. We are very much just hands-on practitioners. Osteopathy kind of in the US felt, I think, that it needed to have more validation. It didn't want to be put in the woo-woo bucket with with the homeopathies and the, you know, things that have been very, you know, held in very good esteem, but then had been, you know, as the medical model gained momentum and funding from certain entities, it was, let's demonize all these other alternative therapies and put them in the woo-woo bucket so that we, you know, try and drive everyone towards, well, this is the only thing that works, the medical model. And so osteopaths were sort of caught in this, which bucket do we go into? And so they were brought under the medical umbrella. So in the US, a DO, doctor of osteopathy, their training is pretty much regular medical school. They do their surgical rotations or their inpatient hospital kind of stuff, with a sort of osteopathic philosophy in there. And I think, you know, I've talked to many osteopaths, and there are different schools. Some are MD, do regular MD, and then there's sort of an additional training that they do to bring in the osteopathic philosophies. The DOs, it's actually an osteopathic school, but again, it very much adheres to the medical model. And they work in the traditional medical infrastructure. So a lot of them work as family physicians, so they're prescribing medications and giving injections and really not doing the hands-on stuff. And I've had conversations with osteopaths here, and I'm like, why don't you do the hands-on stuff, which is what we're really known for in the rest of the world? And they're like, we can't bill for it under insurance. So we're back to the idea that it's the sort of the bean counters and administrators that are dictating what is appropriate medical you know, practice and what can be practiced and what can't be practiced. So those US osteopaths that do hands-on work have to do it outside the insurance system. So it's a fee for service kind of thing. So that's really the distinction. So most people will view an osteopath as really not much different from a regular doctor. So they don't really understand it as an independent profession as it is elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, thanks for the summary.
Yeah, I've got to just bring a couple of things up, just listening to all of that. Like from a divination perspective, it's just so classic, everything that you're sharing and your journey so far. So like in esoteric numerology, your ruling card is the Four of Swords from the Minor Arcana of the Tarot. And the Four of Swords is all about discovery, learning, education, institutions. And then I look at it from an astrology perspective, and you have Virgo in house 6. So house 6 is all about work. It's what we're like at work. And Virgo is what brings order. It's what brings details, what brings precision. It's analytical. So just the way you're absorbing all this information constantly. Yeah. Just want to bring that up. It's absolute classic. Just listening to you, the way you're expressing everything, and then in my head, I'm like, wow.
Well, even from a human design standpoint, you know, you're a 1-3 profile. So the 1 is known as the investigator, and then the 3 is known as the trial and error, like learning through trial and error and just experimenting and bumping into things and learning what works, what doesn't work. You know, and so it's just like it's this process of building that deep foundation of knowledge through also just figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and then moving forward in that way. So it's just fascinating.
Oh yeah. And also her incarnation cross is the right angle cross of laws, right? So this is literally about figuring out what doesn't work for the tribe, what doesn't work for the community, then altering the laws so the right conditions are there for things to flourish. So awesome. There's never a coincidence where people find themselves, especially those on an authentic path.
That's it. It's like you're validating me and I'm validating what you're doing. I'm like the living example of what you guys are describing there. Yeah. And it kind of was born for me, you know, it's something, as my cards seem to say, you know, I analyze everything. I have to know why. I was the kid that drove my parents mad by going, why? But this, you know, as I say, I came into this world kind of going, what's this all about? And I always felt this slight detachment, and I literally would I didn't sleep pretty much my entire childhood. I would lie awake at night. Every time I closed my eyes, it still happens today, but as a child, it was much more vivid. I get what most people describe as an ayahuasca trip going on. People describe sort of psychedelic experiences. I'm like, I have that every time I close my eyes. Is that not normal? Okay. But as a kid, every time I closed my eyes, I would literally see this kaleidoscopic, like those kaleidoscopes you used to have, these fractal patterns, but it was all animated, pixelated. Wow. And I would go on these whole journeys, and it had auditory component to it as well. And it was quite terrifying in my childhood, but it was like, where's the end of the universe? If we're here, if that's the universe, what's beyond that? And where do I fit? And I just had this kind of connection to something beyond this. So I feel like my quest for knowledge is trying to find safety. I was trying to find, how do I exist? I wanted to explain myself and my existence, because it felt so tangible. It felt, like it was precarious in a sense. And I work with a lot of people now who are very empathic, very intuitive, and they live in what I call them in the fuzzy place, right? Am I here? Am I not here? I work with a lot of people who've had near-death experiences and who really sort of know what it is to not be embodied and to be embodied, and making decisions all the time about how do I marry those two things. So I think this quest for absorbing knowledge was part of, one thing I often say about the human body is it's either running the safe program or the unsafe program, right? If we're in safe mode, everything's self-regenerating, self-repairing, self-healing. When we're in unsafe mode, we divert resources to dealing with threat, and therefore those other things aren't going on. And that's where we get into dis-ease and dysfunction. So really all we're trying to do is make ourselves feel safe, right? And so my information gathering was a means to make myself feel safe in my environment. I had a lot of separation anxiety as a child, that even going to bed at night was tormenting to me. It used to terrify me that I could hear my mum go to bed, and then my dad, because he was doing shows, would come in later, and I'd hear him go to bed, and I'm like, I'm on my own in this crazy place. I don't want to be here. And I was terrified, but the information helped me regulate myself. So we're always looking to feel safe and to regulate. And so, when we talk today about truth, and everyone's on this quest for truth, and they're using information gathering as a means to achieve that. It's really just people want to feel safe, but safe is not an intellectual process. Safe is a feeling, right? It's a physical embodiment. And so, I think that's, just kind of brought up when you were talking about this investigation thing. It's like, well, why am I doing that?
Yeah, I have that too. I have the one line. I'm a 5-1 though. So 1 is all about seeking that secure foundation through that investigative process. So I totally get that. It resonates with me in different ways. I mean, I didn't have kaleidoscopic eyes at night and things like that, but it definitely was wanting to feel safe, like I know.
Yeah. And I mean, what we're talking about really is the inherent fear of the unknown, right? Like even with what's going on right now, no one really knows what's going on. But even within the truth community, if I believe this piece of information, or if I believe this narrative, or if someone can explain it this way, then all of a sudden there's something known which I can pretend to stand on for a little bit of time. But at the end of the day, we don't know anything about anything, right?
Nothing. It's, even, well, I know I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, let's examine that for a moment. I'm here. Where is here? Is it a GPS coordinate? Well, who am I? When you look at the gut microbiome, the oral microbiome, the skin microbiome, we are more other species than we are us, right? We have fewer human cells than we do all these other cells. We look at the mitochondria in the body, which are the little kind of battery generators that do energy conversion for us in our cells. And each cell, I mean, liver cells can have, a couple of thousand mitochondria within one cell, and we've got several trillion cells in the body. Mitochondria have their own DNA. They're parasites. They're not us. They are a separate entity that's come into symbiosis with us. So I'm a collective, right? I'm not a thing. I'm not one being, you know, I work hands-on with a body, but it's just a collection of creatures, you know. I
and
often
they're constantly changing, constantly rotating. So really, like, you're not even the same moment to moment. You know?
No, nothing's the same. We get a whole new body every few months, right? Everything's turning over. And then when you even look at matter and mass, well, we're not actually mass. We are, you know, people, you know, look at sort of atomic or subatomic level, and they're looking at particles and like they're a thing. Particles, I have this wonderful phrase that came from one of the faculty members of the physics stuff that I study. Particles are a behavioral event. So they're not stuff. We are just a behavioral event within the field, you know. And then what is the field? Well, it's like water. You know, is a fish aware of the water it's swimming in? Right? We're just swimming in a field, but it doesn't feel like there's anything there. But if you then get in the water, if you get like a vortex, right, around your plug hole or a whirlpool or something, suddenly that you can feel that, right? There's resistance, there's a resistance, and then as you get too close, a gravitational attraction. So then you think it's a thing, but it's really just a swirl in the field. And when you look at unified physics, which is looking at how do we correlate the quantum level with the sort of Newtonian physics, classical physics level, because as we all know, the classical physics model breaks down at the quantum level. Unified physics seeks to unify across all scales what's actually going on. And when you look at it from a perspective of field dynamics, it is like a fluid flow, and that we are just a swirl within the field that makes us feel like we're tangible, but we're essentially a black hole, right? And where we exist is sort of on the event horizon of the black hole, which is where the information is, right? And then we tend to exist here and look at what everything from us to infinity, right? We think of everything that expands outwards from us, the universe, the multiverses, whatever, to infinity. What we don't consider is that there's the equivalent amount of infinity from our event horizon inwards. Right? So when I've started to visit that with the sort of unified physics model, and you start looking at the particles and the behavioral events of the field going to infinity, and how it is infinitely small within us, and we're the midpoint between the two, but we're all about what's happening out here, and we're not taking care of what's going on in here. Then you again are sort of changing what is the concept of me, where am I in all of this? And then you put sort of consciousness and a soul or whatever on top of that. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of rabbit hole, black holes.
And I mean, as the great Hermetic axiom says, as above, so below, as within, so without. And it's almost like what you've done, which is a very logical approach from my point of view, is exploring the macrosm by understanding the microsm. Like, you've gone so detail oriented towards what's the smallest particle, toward the inward journey, the physical, right? And in doing so, we can understand the universe by understanding our inner physiology, the inner laws that rule our vessel here in whatever this existence is.
Yeah, and that's what the unified physics kind of model describes, is that when you look at the geometry and the mechanics, if you like, of the black holes that make us up, of which there are infinite number, everything repeats at scales. You know, the universe is like a sort of series of nested Russian dolls with the same patterns repeating at scale. And so the work that I've been studying is the work of the physicist Nassim Haramein. And he's just about to publish a paper that literally provides the equations that unify everything from the sub-Planckian scale. So we've got, atoms that are made up of protons. The protons are made up of what are called Planck spherical units. And there are 10 to the 40, that's a one with 40 zeros after it, PSUs, these Planck spherical units per each proton body. And then there's the sub-Planck level, which is the equivalent between a sub-Planck and the Planck is the scalar equivalent is us to halfway across the universe, so this is the depths of infinity you go to in the small stuff. And he's got equations that basically unify the physics right from that sub-Planckian level right through to universal cosmological level. So you can look at a spiral galaxy and it has the same structure and geometry as all the spirals of the sub-Planckian little events that are happening at that minuscule level. They're just repeating at different scales. So that definitely is that microcosm versus the macrocosm. It is all the same thing. So yeah, that's, just mind-blowing when you start to look at that. But it's also so simple. Yeah. You have to kind of go to the complex to find out it's really quite simple.
I want to ask you this, because we're primarily the other, when we list the microbiome and or everything, we have all these bacteria and other particles and this and that and fungi and parasites, like this obsession with fearing the other, like, oh, now this thing called, I'm trying not to use these code words on here, especially in the first part, but this thing that everyone's been taught is like the most dangerous thing against humanity, which I mean, from what I've read, it hasn't even been figured out to be a thing, so like I'm just like, just talk about that a little bit. Like, what are your thoughts on even that? Like, I'm just curious.
I mean, for me, it's, it's about resonance, harmony. When we are talking about a parasite, a bug of some sort that's in the field, and that, again, most people have this idea it's attacking us. We're always sort of anthropomorphizing these things to well, they're attacking me. The osteopathic thinking is not that something external to us attacks us, it's our duty to have a vessel that can come into harmony and resonance with any visitors from outside of our localized field. And if we are unable to do that, then that's our responsibility. It's not its fault for attacking us. It's whether we are in a state of coherence that is able to adapt. And we talk about, survival of the fittest, the sort of Darwinian model. Again, there are behavioral kind of edicts that are put into that. Oh, well, it's dog eat dog. It's a competitive world. That's not how nature works. It's a collaborative model, right? So it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the adaptable. So how flexible are you, and can you shift and adapt? We're doing that on a minute by minute, moment by moment basis all the time. If the temperature suddenly gets too hot in this room, we can only exist between a very narrow temperature range in the body. So our system is going to automatically start to adapt to bring our temperature up or bring it down, depending on environmental conditions. So we're in this constant state of adaptation. And our ability to survive is directly correlated to our ability to adapt, which is why a young kid who's full of vitality and health and adaptability, flexibility in the body, they can break their pelvis and get over it in the matter of a few months. An elderly person who has less adaptability, is more rigid, less elastic, less flexible, that could kill them, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're not able to adapt to it. So
you even see that with children, even just emotional flexibility. Like you see a child who's just like goes from literally looking like a psychopath and then a second later laughing, hey, everything's fine. It's just like this dance between emotion. And it's not like 5 minutes later, they're thinking about that moment where they were a psychopath, you know what I mean? Where they wanted to bite someone's ear off. They're just like, okay, great. There's a ball in a lake and some mud. I'm cool. You know what I mean? It's just like this dance. And I think Well, you say that emotional flexibility and physical flexibility is such a huge piece of your work and your knowledge. So I'd love for you to just keep talking about that.
And how do we maintain that? Like,
Right.
what are some of the keys that you've discovered?
Yeah, well, for me, physical and emotional flexibility go hand in hand. They are one and the same thing. And so, obviously I'm working hands-on with a lot of people. So the state of somebody's tissues is there under my hands, and it doesn't lie, right? You can tell me whatever story you want to tell me with your words. Your body is gonna tell its own story. And I often feel that my role in that process is I translate what the story is telling to you if you're not able to hear it, if you're listening through a different lens and you're not hearing the clear message that's coming through. I often, when I'm working on people's bodies, it's often like I feel like the body going, oh God, someone's listening. Thank you. And then I can translate that for people. So when you think of emotional flexibility, we come back to that idea of, am I running the safe program and am I running the unsafe program? If I'm safe in my environment, I can be flexible, right? I can let anything come at me and I'm good with it. I can be in my juicy kind of self. If I'm under threat, so if we think of, sort of primitive humans living under constant threat of a predatory attack, when we encounter a predator, we have to become rigid, right? We have to develop a shell. So we will take on a posture, our what's called the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight system, sets certain processes into motion when we are perceiving some sort of threat. And one of those is it's going to create muscle tension, right? So we're ready to run or attack this thing. But what will also happen to the fascia in the body, so the fascia is a connective tissue that literally coats everything in our body. And we have many, many layers of it. But in particular, we have a layer beneath the skin, what's called subcutaneous. And it's very much dialed into our emotional states, because when we're under attack, we need to create body armor, right? Because we might be physically attacked. So we need to create a shell around us. So when I'm working on people, and I can feel, and as a hands-on practitioner with very refined skills, you can tell the difference between what's fascial tension, what's muscle tension. Different tissues have a different palpatory kind of sensation when you're working on them. And you can often, or I tend to have a good perception of what is emotionally driven tension in the body and what is, I just ran a marathon yesterday and my body's kind of freaked out. And again, that's just a protective mechanism when the body goes, holy hell, what just happened, right? So the physical and the emotional are the same thing, that they play out in the tissues of our body. So therefore, when I'm working on tissues, people come to me and say, I want you to get rid of this muscle tension, or what they perceive as muscle tension, which more often is actually fascial tension. But again, we come back to this question of what and why. It's not, I perceive it as arrogant as a practitioner if I go, well, I'm just going to beat that tissue into submission with aggressive massage techniques, or people that use these fascia busters and these tools to attack their body tissues. If you attack a body tissue, you're going to get a defense response. It'll initially surrender. So often you go, oh, I feel really loose after a treatment. And the next day you're stiff again, right? Because the body went, what the hell did you do to me? I'm going to have to defend myself again. So the body is so intelligent. I mean, it's way more intelligent. There's a difference between intellect and intelligence, right? The body is highly intelligent. Most of us have intellectual thoughts that we impose on the body and assume we know what's best. If a muscle or a fascial area is tight, the body has a jolly good reason for it being there, right? It is doing it possibly to stabilize an unstable joint that might be over there, underneath there. So if I, as a practitioner, come in and go, oh, this is tight, I'm going to beat that into submission, take that out. Well, now you've destabilized the joint that tight muscle was protecting. And so guess what? The body's going to go, oh, that's wobbly again. Let's lock that up again, which is why people say, I have a massage, feel great. And then 2 days later, it's back again. And you're just in this to and fro thing. And the same with an emotional state. If I just come in and beat the fascia into submission and somebody goes, oh, now I feel like a limp noodle, I feel great, but you haven't addressed the behavioral pattern that was driving that need to protect oneself, it's just going to come back again. So you have to address the why, not the what. And so I'm not going to take away something without replacing it. So if there's an unstable joint under there, well, let's find a way to stabilize that joint. Then that muscle doesn't have to grip. Similarly with emotional fascial protection mode, if I just take that away, but we haven't addressed why do you not feel safe, then it's just going to come back. So whether it's a physical instability or an emotional instability that's driving that tissue tension, you have to deal with the why and make sure you can't take something away in the body without putting something in, right? So that's, again, a lot of the missing piece when people go for treatment, is they're not asking the right question, and they're not replacing something if they're taking something away. So that often means we have to go quite deep, and we have to find, coming to your question, Joel, about, well, what do we do about it? If we're talking about not feeling safe, which is anxiety, all of those kind of emotional expressions that might manifest in many different ways, overly aggressive, anxious, they're all just fear-based responses. People don't feel safe. So when you boil it down to that, we have to teach, for a lot of people, we have to learn what safe feels like, because it's not a thought, it's a feeling. And a lot of people are just like, I don't even know what safe feels like in my body. How do I get there? So that's a process we have to go through for finding a tangible sensation of safety in the body, so that you can then dial that up at any given moment. It's always in your toolkit, either to preempt a situation that is often emotionally triggering for you, or to be able to redress an anxious expression. And again, a lot of people will say to me, I want you to get rid of my anxiety. I'm like, no, you don't. It serves a purpose, right? The body knows what it's doing. What we're talking about is that expression of anxiety either appropriate to any given situation or proportionate. If you're sitting in your bedroom stressing about a job interview the next day, but there's no physical threat in your environment, it's not appropriate for you to be like, because you're not under threat. But if you step out into traffic and a car comes out of nowhere, you want that system to come online and pull you out of there. So that's an appropriate expression of that fear response. So when we understand those distinctions, and we understand what does safe feel like versus this unsafe feeling, then we can start to be more discriminate and proportionate with our responses. But it's like anything in the body, you've got to train it.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing too, when you think about what a person went through in their childhood. If their foundational environment was like chaotic and the opposite of safe, like it's so important to do that work. But initially, the person, when they first, this is what I find, maybe it's different in your experience, like when they first get a taste of what that feeling is, that can be more destabilizing because they're used to the chaos. Like the chaos is what's comfortable to them. The drama is what's comfortable to them. And so it is this slow process of doing that work and being with the person and slowly allowing them to feel that it's okay. You know what I mean? Like it's an interesting thing when you see people like, why do you keep going towards that chaotic, abusive relationship? And then it's like, oh, well, this person was like their mom or their dad or the environment they grew up in. So it's just fascinating to think about.
Yeah, what you're talking about there is I was talking in very simplistic terms about this safety idea, but like you say, for people whose only experience has been of that chaos, there is a conflation between safety and familiarity. So we are rewarded as children in particular, we are, we're all about survival, right? We are a species that cannot survive as a young member of that species without parental help, right? Some animals are born and they're immediately skipping off and being independent, we are wholly dependent on our parental caregiver for our survival. If we're left on our own, we don't make it. So therefore, our biology is very much programmed to bond with the caregiver and to keep them safe at all costs. So when we're around the caregiver, we create dopamine and all these kind of reward chemicals to reward us for being close to that person who will keep us safe. And when we're away from them, we get the anxiety response to tell us, don't do that, go for this. So we are chemically being, Pavlov's dogs, being conditioned for these responses. So when you get this mismatch where a caregiver who should be providing your safety and security is doing the opposite and is destabilizing you, you have this cognitive dissonance of, this person is trying to keep me safe, therefore whatever they can do no wrong, right? So as a child, you cannot have a belief system where the person who's keeping you safe can do wrong, because that's going to threaten your survival. So therefore you go, it must be me. So that's where we get the shame and the blame coming in. But also the anxiety response we feel around the caregiver, we're also getting this conflation where, well, that is familiar, therefore it's safe. Because if I'm around that, this is the person who's supposed to keep me safe. So feeling this anxiety must be safe, right? So it gets very complex as we get into these kind of layers. So therefore, you will always go towards what's familiar, because the chemistry has been skewed between safe and unsafe. So if you're used to abusive behavior, it feels familiar to you. So you'll keep going towards that, even at a subconscious level, even though consciously you might be like, no, your biology is rewarding being around an aggressive person or being dominated and you being submissive within that relationship. So this is where that conflation occurs. So if somebody has those sort of triggers going on, we have to look at reprogramming the nervous system and putting new labels on the safe and unsafe and the familiar versus the unfamiliar, so that they're more, again, appropriate labels for those sensations in the body.
So like taking this concept to a collective level, the primary caregiver for most of us was the schooling system a lot of the time, right? I mean, we spent 15,000 odd hours being molded by these government institutions, where we feel, I guess, quote unquote, this is familiar to us. We taught and indoctrinated to obey and to comply, and by obeying and complying, then we're not going to get in trouble and therefore we're going to be safe. Now, all of a sudden, we're living in this time where the government is telling us to obey and comply so you can be safe. And I think it's then we can begin to develop reason as to why some people might be so hesitant to step out of line when they've now adopted the government as their primary safety or their primary caregiver on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, behavioral programming is so powerful, and it's something, I've been looking at in myself for the last couple of years and really picking apart, is that programming or is that really what I believe? And it's hard, and it's confronting at times. You're like, holy hell, I've been thinking that all the time. That's just a behavioral program. I don't really believe that at a cellular level. So yes, and it's this sort of hierarchical structure that's been imposed again on at all scales in society, starting with schooling, and certainly my training, I work a lot with arts training, right, which can be very abusive, in a well-meaning way. Well, it's a tough profession, so if we don't beat you into submission, you're not going to be tough enough to survive the profession. Which is completely goes against everything we know about psychology and how we actually create self-worth and self-value. So yeah, there's a whole host of things that we're exposed to as children that take away our sense of agency, our sense of I have some control in this, that I am completely dependent upon everyone around me telling me what to do. And I think, it's become worse with the advent of social media. And, we see, there are studies with children, we were talking about chemical bonding, right? You get a reward chemical for being around your caregiver and an anxiety chemical from being away from them. Children now have those chemical bonding mechanisms programmed to their devices. So their devices have become their parent and their caregiver. When you get, I always say to people, I work with a lot of people on social media or device addiction. And when you get that, got to check my phone, which is happening how many times a day for people, check my messages, check my messages. That's what is chemically driving you to do. What is that? It's not, you say, oh, it's my brain telling me, yeah, but what, again, it's why? It's actually a cortisol response, a stress hormone being you're away from your caregiver. Stress, right? So your stress drives you to pick up the phone or go to the computer, whatever the device is. And then when you get the download of whatever it is you've gone to see, you get a dopamine, which is your happy reward chemical feedback.
I got a new follower. Someone sent me a message.
I'm loved. Yeah. I am getting affection.
I'm special.
I mean something to somebody. Yeah. So it is this. So you're in this dance of like cortisol, adrenaline. Cortisol, dopamine. And it's addictive, right? Dopamine is addictive. It's when we talk about chemical dependency and addiction to cocaine and things like that. It's not cocaine that people are addicted to per se. It's the dopamine response that you get from taking cocaine that you're addicted to, right? It's your own chemistry. So people are in this chemical dance with their devices. And again, with a child, it's the same as a caregiver. So if you say, right, I'm going to punish you and take your phone away from you, they're going to experience separation anxiety, the same as if they've been removed from a parent, right? So that's why they're going to scream and shout and feel like they're being punished, because chemically they are being punished for being away from their phone. So now we're seeing bonding mechanisms to inanimate objects, and with all the things that they could be exposed to on that device, then driving even more layers of, and again, all they want to know is, am I safe? And we've moved from living in communities, for the most part, where you're brought up by the community and you've got the neighbors and all the relatives living nearby, and there's this kind of group situation, which we are wired to keep each other safe as a group, as a collective. It's a collaboration, right? Now we live in these more isolated existences with smaller family units, and even just a single parent and a child in some cases. So the community becomes the infinity that expands when you go into that device, right? It's just like we were talking about the infinities either side of us, there's that whole thing that expands when you go into that. Well, and now I have community, back in my childhood when we didn't have phones and all these internet and all these kind of things, it was the soap operas on TV. I was in a TV driven household with my dad being a TV director. So we were, the conversation over the garden fence became watching the soap opera and hearing the gossip from, this became our community. So we've outsourced physical community for this, virtual community. But
can I ask you something on that? Do you sense there's any benefit to online community or to virtual community?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not one of these kind of purists. We can't have any of this stuff. I mean, look at us talking on this amazing device right now. It is incredible, but it's like anything. Everything in moderation is great. Having a glass of wine is lovely, but if you have 3 bottles of wine, you're in trouble, right? So, and if you're addicted to having that and you can't survive without it, it's a problem. So it's all again about appropriate and proportionate use of these devices. I'm an English person living in the States, having internet and all these abilities to be able to speak to people thousands of miles away is absolutely wonderful. But if I spend all day, every day
Yeah.
on this, and I don't ever speak to anyone in my community, not so healthy.
And the thing is, it's like these technologies, this social, it's a tool. Now,
Yeah.
how do you use the tool? The problem is our social engineers, the people who created this technology, they understood all these vulnerabilities or realities of the human psyche, or like this chemical process that goes on. And so they play on that. So it's like you have to even like be even more like in tune with yourself, present, to be like, okay, I'm gonna use this device, or I'm gonna share some information, then I'm gonna go off of it. But it's tricky because you start getting that dopamine. It's seductive.
It's seductive, and it's also that same sense of where do I start and it ends, where do I end and it begins, which can happen with parents as well. Some people who are so like bonded with their parent, they can't then separate, and they still living at home in their 40s and unable to become independent. It's a similar sort of setup. We have to but with a parent, they're normally kind of policing that situation for you and helping you to become independent. Whereas with a device, an inanimate object, it's always wanting to draw you in. It's trying to sell you something. It's driven by corporations who just don't really care about you. They just want to make some money, right? So that smudging of, again, the self versus the other. And that is something, even though I've talked about what is self, and it is a very nebulous concept anyway, we have to, for me, the self is a feeling. It's a sense of coherence in my body. Truth for me is a sense of, am I in coherence? Am I in resonance with this piece of information, or this person, or this situation? Or is there something off in my system? But if you've never learned to listen to that, you've never learned to learn the language of the body, then you're not going to have that tool available. Therefore, you're just in a constant state of being pulled in all these different directions, and you're much more prone to being, sucked into an addictive kind of pathway, because you don't have that point of reference. Most people just need a point of reference that is them, so that they can judge from that place.
And from my perspective, like what you just described to me is intuition. Like intuition is simply coherence with the body and understanding what the body is comfortable with and when it's not. But the issue that most people experience is that because they've spent so long rejecting the advice of the body or rejecting their intuition, then they go out and they make decisions. We tell little white lies. We make actions which are against what our inherent nature and our spirit. Then we disconnect from that even more. Then what we find ourselves in is in this state where we're just grasping at anyone to save us and to show us some semblance of truth, because we become disembodied in that process, because we're so disconnected from who we really are and what our body's really saying, that literally anything can then come and, I guess, contaminate our field in that way, because that strength of connection with our intuition, with our body, is so frail at that point.
Yeah, you're just sort of dissolving, you're decohering into the field rather than being in this state of coherence. And it's, this is what we should be teaching in schools, right? Yeah. That for me, it's the fundamental, tool or sensation that can carry us through this world. Yes, intellectual information is useful to navigate this world, but if you don't have that point, that compass point underneath it all of that sense of self, however you've described that, then you're really just in a constant sort of floating state. And we've talked about being adaptable, but being adaptable requires a point of reference, so that you can be elastic and reach out there, but you're anchored back here, and you will recoil back to center, whichever way you go from it. Yeah. Without that, you're just, floating on the thermals and being carried somewhere that you may not wish to go.
And this is the exact message of the lemniscate, which some people refer to as the infinity symbol, right? But simply that point of reference and coming back to that center and realizing that we extend and then we come back, and we extend and we come back. And like this is the underlying premise of the universe, is this flow, and this is why understanding, the laws of the universe is so powerful and impactful for everything that you do in your life.
Totally. And it was so interesting that you bring up that infinity symbol, the lemniscate. And I was up in the Sequoia National Forest, I think it was September last year. And, there's so much that nature can teach us, right? The trees, everything. I was like, oh, I learned a whole new thing about fascia from just putting my hands on the bark of one of these giant sequoia trees. And then I was sitting watching a beautiful river there, and there were all these rocks in it, and there was this beautiful lemniscate pattern going on with the eddies in this water. And I just sat there and went, oh, and I went back to the place I was staying, and I got a pen and paper, and I mapped that infinity symbol, which is not just like a flat 8, right? It's 3D. It's
that's right.
Whole 3D thing. I mapped that for every joint in the body.
Wow.
All lemniscates, and as you walk, there's a forward to back one, there's a side to side one, and then I was able to see observing. I spend my life observing people's gait patterns and things, going, oh, that left knee, and it's noisy in my head. But I could see it was like, oh, that person's missing the left arc of the 8, if you like, the figure 8 in their hip. It's just cranking from the right. So if I can use that image for them to say, right, there's an infinity symbol going this way in your hips, and I want you to find each arc of it. And I felt it in my own body as well. My left hip is a little cranky from my dancer days. And as I was walking, I was like, oh, I'm missing the back arc of that 8. And as soon as I consciously put that in, I suddenly was springing along, and I was like, oh, this is efficient. I'm always looking for efficiency in the body. How little effort do we need to ambulate through space, right? And so that infinity sign, it's just that's another thing on my list of things to do that I have endless things of, is to really document that out. And I called it lemniscapes with a P, like the scapes, like land. And that, it could be a whole new movement education system for people that's very visual, rather than saying, well, your left hip's that, it just gives people a visual to work with. And actually I started, I thought, has anybody else come up with this? Of course, and sort of looked on the net, is this original thought? Am I grasping that end of that rainbow? No. And I found a French guy who he's got a machine that takes people's feet through this figure 8 thing for neurological recovery from sort of stroke damage and from movement disorders, and was having amazing, because again, it's just this inherent shape, it's sacred geometry, right? The body knows. And again, when you're talking about truth, when I'm teaching, I don't even like that word anymore. I teach workshops about the body and anatomy. It's when people connect with that information, you're not telling them anything, that it's their body going, oh yeah, I get it. I know it already. Everyone knows this stuff. And all I'm doing is reminding. And when you remind someone of this, it's like the body just goes, oh, thank you. Now you're listening. So that lemniscate is just absolutely a fundamental part of geometry. It's the toroidal field, right? Which is the black holes are toroidal fields, these sort of donut shaped things, and it's actually a double torus, which creates that figure 8 infinity symbol, and that's in our geometry. It's in the geometry of the cosmos, and when we honor those things, life becomes a lot easier, physically and emotionally.
Absolutely.
That was so cool listening to that.
Oh yeah. And no surprise now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Facebook rebranding to Meta is kind of co-opting that entire symbol as their logo. I don't know if you saw that. It's a 3D lemniscate to indicate they're moving into the Meta, the virtual world, which they're going to attempt to overlay. So again, it's always just co-opting what's innate to us as humans. Yeah.
There's so many directions I want to go with from here. I love having conversations with you. I'm so happy you live close to me and we're friends. Man, I wish all so.
Right?
Dude, Topanga is amazing. Topanga probably is some lemniscate vortex going on this planet, dude.
Definitely.
All right. So you talked before about like a person getting into coherence. Now I know it's so general and you can deal with individuals on individual level, but just like what advice would you give a person to be like to get more into coherence, you know, to be more connected to that intuition, to that knowing, you know, so when the world goes insane around them, they don't get swept away with it.
Right. Yeah. So it comes down to listening to the body, getting in touch with the body. And that requires going quiet, which can be uncomfortable for people, right? People use noise and you know, interaction with, you know, devices and things as a safety mechanism because they're afraid of the quiet, right? So one of the sort of basic exercises I start with people to explore this is doing a body scan. So it's kind of an active meditation. Now, meditation is something that freaks a lot of people out. Oh, I can't just sit and be quiet. My mind's going. Roar. So using sort of active processes, you know, meditation is an umbrella word that can cover many different, you know, experiences. So doing an active process is usually, you know, more accessible for people. So I literally have them just, you know, lie in a comfortable position and start at your feet and just check in. What can I feel? What can I not feel? What's under the sole of my foot? Does it feel tense? Does it feel relaxed? Do my feet feel like they're safe, or are they holding on a little bit? And then come up to the ankles, then up to the calf muscles, up to the knees. And you literally slowly go through the whole body. And people will often find an area that they're like, oh yeah, my abdomen, you know, I'm always holding in my belly. And can I let that go? And letting that go. Oh, that's safe. So what the nervous system likes to do is to kind of chunk and label things. So if your belly is always a little tight and held, the brain will probably have labeled that, or the nervous system would have labeled that unsafe, right? I feel unsafe, so I've got to brace. So our stomach is our most vulnerable area, right? If you're a four-legged creature, it's nicely protected. As humans, we brought our most vulnerable area up front and center, ready for that gut punch. So we often brace the abdominal wall to be prepared for the gut punch. So it becomes so subliminal that we don't know we're doing it. So when you're doing this body scan, you're literally going, what can I let go of? Is there something I can let go? Oh, I've never experienced that before. Let's label that with I am safe. So you kind of put a mantra on top of it. I am safe. This is what safe feels like. Tighten it up. This is unsafe. This is safe. And then looking at breath patterns as well. You know, how are you breathing as you're lying there? Are you in a sort of upper chest breathing? That's an unsafe breathing pattern. It goes with the fight or flight response. Can we choose a different breath? So again, you can't just take something away without having something to replace it with. So first of all, we have to explore for that person, what does safe feel like? So it becomes more tangible. So for some people, it's shoulders, some people it's belly, some people it's the breath pattern. So then you can't change anything in the body unless you're aware that you're doing the other thing first. And that's the most tricky part. So that's kind of the first thing people have got to address. So if it's somebody that always has their shoulders up all the time and they've never learned to just go, oh, I've got this option, right? And this is safe. I have them literally put sticky notes around the house, on your computer screen, on your fridge door, on your bathroom mirror, wherever, you know, you hang out habitually, and it just put on it shoulders or belly or breathing, whatever your cue is going to be. And so you're like, oh, and so you catch yourself, you train yourself to bring that into awareness. It's Pavlov's dogs again, right? Ringing the bell and they salivate. So it's a conditioning response. So until you're aware that how often you're hanging out like this, you're not going to have the awareness to change it. So that's normally the first thing. then making sure they've got an option of what it feels like not to do that, and then labeling that as a safe posture. Then as they've sort of trained that for themselves, you can then start putting that into the field experiment, right? And taking it out into the business meeting or the whatever. Okay, before I walk into that room, because I've already done this just thinking about it, let's dial up the safe posture and take that into the room so that the nervous system is not starting from 8, right? We're starting at 2, and we've got some ceiling of capacity to go to. And what you'll also find, so like you can get really deep into this with body language and what you are, you know, most of our communication is non-verbal, right? You know, 99% of it. So if you're going into that business meeting like this, you're already projecting a fear posture out into the field, and we are all hardwired to read that, right? We are designed to live in tribal groups. And, you know, if I'm sitting opposite you and some weird creature creeps up behind you, I'm going to go like that. You're going to do that even though you haven't seen it yet, because what's going to get me is probably going to get you first, because you're sitting between the two of us. So we are hardwired to respond without even checking. So if somebody comes into a meeting like this, everyone goes, oh, you know, everyone's on guard already. And if you've got someone in there who likes to find their identity by dominating people, they're going to go, ooh, I found myself a prey. And now they're coming at you, right? Similarly, if you go in aggressive mode and somebody is a dominator in there as well, they're going to be, well, now you're the stags butting, right? So you've got the same problem. Equally, if you go in there and completely submissive and I can't make eye contact, and you know, you're going to be preyed upon. So if you can find this neutral, so it comes back to that, who am I, right? Who am I in neutral? That calibration point. You're in neutral, you can diffuse anything that's around you, because you are no longer an aggressor or a prey. So your predator's going to be sort of like, they get kind of disarmed, you know, and they quite know, oh, well, like it's very inappropriate for me to become aggressive in this situation because your body language is not allowing for it. So then you start to learn that what works for you works for the collective. And that's why I always say we have a collective responsibility to the field. And that's a lot of what's gone on in the last year or so, is collective fear. You know, if we talked about the field being like water, it's like, don't piss in your own water in your own field. So if you're putting junk out into the field, you're polluting your own field for everybody. So if you can go into the field in a very open, neutral space, that has a ripple effect through those around you, and therefore you become the puppet master of any situation you're in emotionally. Therefore you're always safe, right? I know that I can go into any situation, no matter how aggressive someone's being, I can pretty much diffuse it. Obviously there are times when people are off the scale and then you just remove yourself from their path, right? But on that more subliminal level, you can neutralize a lot of behaviors. Therefore you're making yourself feel safe in the process, and everyone else. So it's just less exhausting for everybody.
You know, there's that word that everyone throws around, and this is what we're talking about, is presence. You know, people say like, oh, you got to be present, you know, and it's like, well, this is what it is. It's like the ability to respond to whatever is the appropriate response to the situation you're in. The most appropriate response is going to come when you're present, when you're in that neutral place, and you're not thrown off your center, and you don't get caught up in this emotional back and forth arguing and yelling, because it's like someone could go crazy and you could just like talk about emotional flexibility and physical flexibility.
We're most adaptable in neutral, right?
You're adaptable there.
I call it autocorrect, you know, for people like that kind of language. It's like if you've got a tall building and it's built absolutely rigid, a lot, you know, hard wind comes along, it's just going to crack and break. Whereas if it's built to autocorrect, you can not just autocorrect. So it's much more energy efficient in the body, but it's also, you know, going to manage the collective energy around you as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about something, if you're willing to talk about it, since we're talking about structure. Okay. Is because you have such experience of putting your hands on people, and in the last however long, a lot of people.
Professional context, of course.
Yeah. Of course, professional context. I mean, maybe out of professional context you've experienced too, you know? I mean, I'm just saying.
I'm neutral on that.
You know, there has been this thing lately that is the new mandated medicine.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, like, what has been your experience with it? You know, being around people or working with people that have made the choice, you know, the personal choice to take part in that.
Yeah, and you know, it's again, if you take it out of the, you know, language that we've put around these sorts of things and look at it again as a frequency thing, everybody's going to respond in different ways because everybody's coming to that with a different mindset. Some people are like totally bought in, this is a miracle thing, it's going to work for me. Some people have reservations about it and they're feeling forced to get it, so therefore they're coming in with a different, you know, we call it the biology of belief, right? Our biology is set up in different ways, whether we're in alignment with something or not in alignment with it. So we have to kind of look at those sorts of factors when we're talking about this. But in my experience of working hands-on with people who've chosen to have it, it was, you know, we always say, you know, in research, correlation is not causation. So these are just kind of experiences that I've had that have been shared by many of the hands-on practitioners that I know, that we all suddenly collectively started saying, are you noticing this going on? And I haven't, you know, it's something that's happened over this time period. And what I noticed was that it's something I was picking up with my hands, but it was also something that patients were reporting to me as well. This kind of sense of the body being a lot more kind of almost like a sense of water retention, kind of the sort of term people have been using and that I use for it as well, is this sort of sense you've got a layer of blubber just under the skin. And as I was working on people, you know, you can feel the skin, the fascia, then the muscle, and between that you've got the sort of subcutaneous tissue, and there was sort of a sponginess occurring in people who I was working on who had recently undertaken the offering that is being offered by the medical profession at the moment. And so it was just something I was picking up on, and then I would find that I was experiencing that myself, having worked on somebody hands-on. And then I was speaking to other practitioners, and I'd started to notice this, and I hadn't told anyone. I was just still trying to figure it out a bit myself. And then a friend of mine who's a massage therapist said, I've been picking up on this kind of, you know, squelchy feeling, like water retention-y feeling in so many of my patients. And these are obviously people that we used to work with before, so we knew what their normal kind of tissue state was, and then they're coming back having had the sort of intervention, and then suddenly this change had happened. So it was something that I was hearing from many different sources. And as I, you know, of course I have to analyze why. And when you talk about, we call this the interstitial space, right, between the cells. So we have our cells, and then we have the spaces between our cells, and the spaces between our cells it's actually the biggest organ of the body, the interstitium, as we call it, because it connects everything, right? It's between everything in the body. And it's kind of a fluid gel-like matrix, but it's also a detox pathway. So if you've got something coming into the cell that's toxic, what the body will do, the body's always trying to protect the core, right? Because what goes on right in the core is pretty vital. We're sort of constructed in a way that the vital stuff's buried more than the, you know, and the stuff towards the surface is a little more able to adapt to given conditions. So the body will often detox towards the periphery, right? It'll push toxins out into the interstitial and the subcutaneous tissue as it's trying to push it out of the body. So that was kind of my sense, that the body was in some sort of detox process and trying to push a foreign entity out of the cells. And you know, this idea of being able to transmit that to other people, obviously I was then experiencing that myself in my body. again, I listen to so many different perspectives on this and try and pick up commonalities of what people are thinking. And one of the sort of prevailing theories is that there is some sort of expression via the kind of the sweat glands in the body, that something is being transmitted out that way. And we know sweating is detox, right? So there's something that's being sweated out of the body that potentially could be absorbed to someone else, and then they're needing to sweat that out of the body as well. So I just, started to use like Epsom salt baths and things like that to help expel that from my body, to help draw that out. But also just on an energetic level, again, it's all just frequency that I would add into my daily kind of practice. I have a, if you want to call it a meditation practice, but I don't empty my mind because that doesn't work for me. You might be surprised to hear. I check in with my collective. I imagine all these microbes and everything that make us up. It's my collective. To me, they're like the little minions from Despicable Me. I'm like, hey guys, what did I not listen to today? What do you need? What's going on? I just do a check-in and do that sort of body scan through my body. And I kind of added into that practice, I reject all frequencies that do not serve my body. Yeah. So just that sort of mantra on an energetic level, saying I choose not to absorb these frequencies. And you look at people, I have a friend who's he's a Swiss prince who was huge in the sort of 60s in London. He was friends with the Beatles, the Stones, he's lived in Tibet and India. He's done it. He was like, when we were having a conversation about these shots as they first, appeared, and he was like, we used to do snake venom laced with petroleum, but if you get your frequency to a place where you're not allowing that in, you can do anything. You have these kind of gurus and people who can drink rat poison and it has no effect on them because they do not allow that into their frequency. You have to be kind of ninja level to make it.
Yeah, of course. We don't recommend that. Don't go out and drinking rat poison, okay?
But I include that to the level that I am able into my kind of self-care, if you like, to just say, okay, I choose not to be in resonance with that, and I choose to maintain my field, the integrity of my field, in the way that I feel is of most benefit to my health.
Well, I think this is a good segue into, also real quickly, I just want to touch on this topic because I used to do like a mantra, like I raise my vibration above radiation. I'm not going to be impacted by these electromagnetic frequencies. Now, we did the best we can with our home, with making things to mitigate things. But I know this is also an area that you've studied and you've gone down the rabbit hole of EMFs and 5G. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the potential impacts on the body of an individual who isn't someone who can alchemize or transmute rat poison, for the average person.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's also the concept of what we call allostatic load in the body. So that's, I live on an island where everything's clean and there's no EMF and whatever, and I get exposed to an environmental toxin, then my whole immune system is available to deal with that, and it'll probably deal with it quite well. I hate to sort of, reduce the body to basic terms, and particularly to weaponized terms. But if you think of your immune system as being like you have an air force and an army and a navy, and you've got all these different areas of your immune system that are often fighting battles. So if you live in somewhere where there's a lot of air pollution, okay, so the Air Force are out there dealing, some of your troops are out there trying to neutralize the air pollution. Then if you're drinking water that's not very pure, then you've got your navies out, dealing with that. And then you've got, foods that you're eating that are not the best for you, and so then your gut's having to deal with that. So your immune system is very busy, and then you add EMF frequency on top of that, and you've got no troops left. is going to suddenly the looting starts, right? Because all the police are out elsewhere and there's a back door open and you're going to be overcome. So this is known as allostatic load in the body, that sometimes, so I've worked with a lot of people who have EMF sensitivity, hypersensitivity. I would argue we are all EMF sensitive, but some people have symptoms from that, right? Because perhaps their system, it was the straw that broke the camel's back that made them respond in that way, whereas someone else can be around it and not seem to have a problem. It's a bit like the whole gluten thing. All our bodies have a problem with gluten, but if some people are generally quite healthy and they're not fighting too many battles, their body's mopping up every time they eat gluten and they're not getting symptoms, and the gut lining repairs every 3 days, so you get a whole new gut lining. So if you're able to repair, then you're not noticing the symptoms. If you've not got many repair mechanisms available because they're all fighting a lot of other battles, suddenly you start to notice symptoms from it. So that kind of explains why some people go, I have no problem with it, other people do, but essentially it's another toxin. It's we term it electrosmog, right? You can't see it, so it's often ignored from that sense, but it's a frequency that is not in resonance with, our bodies are all frequency and vibration. We have an electromagnetic field, or our organs have electromagnetic fields, and they all resonate at certain frequencies that are measured in hertz, right? And it's a bit like, you remember in the old days when mobile phones were kind of new, and if you put it down next to your cassette player or something, something with speakers, and you used to get that feedback noise, so we could hear the interference in the field. So that's essentially happening in our bodies. It's a frequency that's coming in, and our bodies are not in resonance with that. So it creates an immune response in the body, and it manifests in many, many different ways. The thing with the 5G that's different about that, it's not just about the power of the signal, because people are often talking about, oh, it's a more powerful signal. It's actually more about the pulse rate. Bit, 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 bit. So there different carrier frequencies have a different pulsation rate. And again, it's that kind of, it's a bit like a pneumatic drill that just kind of goes through your body, like, oh, that's just, that vibration is really, harsh on my body. It's that sort of interference, this pulsating interference, that is particularly troublesome for our body. And what's been shown with that sort of level of pulsation is it's altering the membrane of our cells. So our cells have, just like we talk about the gut lining, right? You can have a leaky gut when the cells of the gut separate a bit and they're allowing stuff in that shouldn't come in, and then you're getting an immune response to it. The cell walls have the same. They have these gates that can open and shut, and they are operated on an electrical kind of pathway. And these are called voltage gated calcium channels. So they have a voltage that opens and shuts them and allows calcium in and out of the cells, which is required for various, kind of processes in the body. So what happens with the frequency is it messes with that voltage mechanism and it opens the gates. And now we have leaky cells, like we have leaky guts, and we're getting an increase. You then get a rush of calcium into the cell, and this is called raised intracellular calcium, right? And raised intracellular calcium levels are the root of many diseases in the body. So we're getting this leaky cell issue, too much calcium in the cells, and it's messing with the basic mechanisms of many of our health processes in the body. And then what's also been shown with these, kind of newer frequencies, it's also opening up blood-brain barrier. So again, we have the blood-brain barrier, which is another gated system, and it's the most heavily guarded of the body, right? Because the brain is kind of important. We can live without various body parts, but once the brain's offline, we've got a bit of a problem going on. So the brain is heavily defended, but these frequencies are opening up blood-brain barriers. So any of the toxins, so if you've got aluminium or aluminum, as you guys like to call it in the system, if you've got heavy metals in your blood system, often the brain, it's not in the brain, right? Because the brain's heavily defended, it's being kept in your bloodstream. So any circulating toxins you've got in your bloodstream, suddenly now your blood-brain barrier is opening up, they're now getting through. The issue is that the immune defenses in the brain, which are called the glial cells, they're like they're the SAS, they're the special forces guys of the immune system, and they come out with cannons, right? So anything that starts coming through the blood-brain barrier, you're going to get a massive kind of immune response to that, which creates a lot of inflammation and collateral damage. It's like a huge warfare goes on. So once you get brain inflammation, you're into potentially sort of neurodegenerative conditions. So this is what we're seeing as, as these EMF frequencies have evolved and become either more powerful or more pulsating. It's messing with a lot of these, we're electrical beings, right? And it's messing with our electrical signals and opening up our defenses and leaving us defenseless to other things that may be around.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think there's a whole podcast that could be explored on this simple topic of EMFs. And I'd love to dive into it, but unfortunately, we're going to have to end this one here. Jennie, you're so amazing. It's just incredible, the wealth and the depth of knowledge that you're able to offer. I'm just so grateful for the path and journey that you've walked to now be in this culmination of this podcast, and to share this conversation. So I just really want to thank you for your time, truly.
Oh, my pleasure. I feel like, all the explorations I've done over the years are worth it when I get to go, hey, this is exciting.
Yeah.
You want to share this with me? So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. So happy to have you on here. And yeah, I just wish you the best. And I can't wait till we get to hang out again.
Tea and a hike soon.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely do that. Well, I'm just happy that you're here for the truth. And that's what it's about,
Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
It's just about, are you in resonance with it or not? That's your truth, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool. Jennie, where can people find you and reach out to you if they want to work with you?
So you can check out my website, which is Jennie Morton, JennieMorton.com. You can contact me via there. I'm not on social anymore because as I work with people who have problems with that, I decided I have to practice what I preach. Yep. Plus I was kind of not too excited by the direction they were taking. So I've moved away from that. I'm
envious.
So freeing. I can't tell you. Yeah. And it's not the end of the world,
Yeah, no, of course.
Followers if I've got one person that wants to chat and work, I'm happy. I don't need thousands.
I love it.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Here for the Truth. This is Jennie Morton. We're going to put all the details in the show notes. Be sure to check her out, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean.